Welcome to the premiere episode of A Story Club Global Politics. This is a unique venture streaming simultaneously from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, from Dehra Dun in India, and San Francisco in the United States. We speak with people from around the world about issues that affect all of us and talk about what we can do to confront the challenges and to assist each other as we each deal with these issues in our own ways and in our own spaces. Today, my guest is the fiercely outspoken, fearless, and distinguished Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former member of the U.S. Reagan administration. Welcome, Dr. Roberts.
Thank you, Kurt.
Yeah, pleasure to have you here. We're also expecting Dr. Cynthia McKinney. She's a former six-term Congresswoman who was the first Black woman elected to represent Georgia and a former US presidential candidate for the Green Party in 2008. There are some technical issues. We haven't been able to reach her, but we hope that she will be joining us to contribute her amazing voice to this important discussion. But today we're going to be discussing a new world order and a new normal. I think Cynthia is coming on.
Yes, I am.
Great.
Just
Great
trying to
have
get
you
my
here.
background right.
Yes. Welcome, Cynthia.
Well, hello, Paul.
Hey, Cynthia. I'm so glad you got on.
Me too. Right. So let me set up our discussion. Today, we're going to be discussing a new world order and a new normal, the world in 2020 and beyond. So are a new world order and the so-called new normal something to be welcomed or feared? How much of where we have reached has been an accident? How much has been foreseen? And how much has actually been planned for? Are the proposed changes to people's rights, their economic livelihoods, their independence, and their privacy inevitably going to be restricted? Or can we fight for a different, freer, and more prosperous future? So let's get into this discussion. Well, first of all, I'd like my distinguished guests to please tell us, especially for the younger viewers and listeners and the non-Americans, just a bit about your background, and particularly what I'm interested in is your experience with the centers of American power and your subsequent move away from it. Let me invite Dr. Roberts first and then Dr. McKinney.
Okay. Well, I began life as an economics professor. I moved into the congressional staff in Washington. I became associate editor of the Wall Street Journal. I became assistant secretary of the Treasury for economic policy. When I left the Treasury, I was a consultant to the Department of Commerce, the Department of Defense. I was part of Reagan's effort to end the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and ended up the William E. Simon Professor of Political Economy at Georgetown, where my colleagues were Henry Kissinger, Brzezinski, James R. Schlesinger, all of those people. So I had about 25 years in the snake pit in Washington.
Yeah, and what's the story briefly? We can get into it later, but your move away from that, how did that happen? Because now it's like you're almost a persona non grata by the same center that you were part of.
Well, the people are different. It's not the same kind of people, I don't think. I was there toward the end of my stay with the rise of the neoconservatives. And the neoconservatives wanted to undo all of the efforts that previous administrations had made to ease the tensions with Russia. Every president had worked to reduce the tensions, to reduce the risk of some kind of nuclear war, largely accidental nuclear war. But the neocons, they wanted to rebuild all these tensions. And they wanted to have the United States very active militarily in the world, particularly in the Middle East, because I think they had in mind using American military power in Israel's interest. And those people, these neoconservatives, they essentially took over the conservative movement in the United States, took over all the conservative foundations, the conservative publications, and it all just became, you know, a great warmongering exercise, and it just wasn't anything that you could stop. And it was in the interest of the powerful military security complex, because it built their power, built their budgets. It was in the interest of energy companies, and certainly was in the neoconservatives' ideology. It was in support of their ideology of the United States world hegemony. So it was just like a locomotive that took over, and became a very disgusting place to be.
Wow. Yeah, that's very, very relevant for our discussion. And I'm so glad for you to be here to share your experience and insights with us. Dr. McKinney, your background for our listeners.
Well, it seems that Dr. Paul is very, how can I say, knowledgeable about the swamp.
Yeah.
And it was a different kind of swamp with different players, but it was still Washington, D.C. And so then as he, I believe, is exiting the D.C. scene, that's when I actually was entering the scene, entering stage left, as he was exiting stage right. And but by that time, and this is what I'm really interested in, Dr. Paul, is that switch over. So you had at one point the United States foreign policy, as bad and malevolent as it might have been, it was still crafted in the interest of the United States. And so then what happened when I came in was that we had a foreign policy that was actually crafted for the interests of another state that was against the interests of my own constituents. And I was supposed to make peace with that. Now, there were many of my colleagues who did. They were horrified at what they had become, but nonetheless, it was who they were. And for them, being there was more important than accomplishing something while you are there. So actually what happens is you become satisfied with small things, small victories, small accomplishments, and yet you are really, it's like this spy movie that I like all kinds of spy movies. And this was a spy movie, I think from John Le Carré. And the protagonist says, you fight all your life to get to the top, only to find that it's the middle. And so that was what I was confronted with, that there were powers. I thought I was a member of Congress and I was charged with making foreign policy, making domestic policy, setting US policy. And I found out that there were higher powers that were basically in control of both of the political parties, and that basically everything that happened in Washington, D.C. was a charade. I found out the hard way, because when I went there in 1992, I got elected. In 1993, I was sworn in, and my constituents, we went up to Washington all together on a dilapidated, broken down bus. And when I raised my hand to take the oath of office, they raised their hands as well. And so this was like huge. This was monumental. My campaign theme had been warriors don't wear medals, they wear scars. These were people who gave and gave and gave in their communities. Some of them didn't even have running water in their homes. It was that kind of poverty that I was forced to confront for the first time in my life. And yet there was hope, there was life, there was spirit, because change was possible, transformation was possible in the United States. But that was up until we ran into the swamp. And then we got devoured by the swamp. And those constituents, I just visited them maybe about 2 weeks ago, and going down through rural Georgia, and things have gone back to the way they were before I was elected. So who I am is a child of the civil rights movement. I understand, I'm a Southerner, I'm a proud Southerner, and I understand that personal individual transformations are possible because I've witnessed them in my own life.
Wow, wow. Two amazing stories. And you are able to give such an important perspective on what's happening today. Because right now with this confusion, with this uncertainty, with this global fear mongering, people, I think, have lost all perspective. And the perspective you're bringing from your experience in the 80s, in the 90s, you know, it's much longer than that, of course, but at the center of American power at that time, that'll be very important. Because I'd like to hear from your perspective, both of you, the changes that you know, as a result of the COVID lockdowns, for example, and all that it has done in social life, civil rights, the economy, of course. Do you see this as particularly epoch changing? And if so, how? Again, let me invite Dr. Roberts first, and then Cynthia after.
Well, no. I think what would be changing is if COVID just becomes a permanent feature, and it's something that everyone has to deal with every year from now on. That would be a huge change. I'm not quite clear how society could adjust to that. If this stuff is now here forever, it will certainly have a major changing impact. Are you still there?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So, but other than that, I don't think the lockdowns themselves or the economic consequences are really that important compared to other things. For example, probably the two worst economic developments that have impacted the United States, or indeed the entire first world. These are the offshoring of jobs. When they moved offshore, the middle class jobs, the manufacturing jobs, software engineering jobs, all this sort of thing, they dismantled the ladders of upward mobility within the United States that had made the country an opportunity society. And the middle class began shrinking. It also had a terrible adverse effect on the ability of the economy to grow, because if consumer incomes are not growing in the aggregate, then aggregate demand can't grow, and therefore the economy can't grow. And so when they shrank consumer purchasing power by sending abroad high productivity, high value added jobs, And all of a sudden, people were now working for half or a third of the former pay, or having to work 2 part-time jobs to try to make ends meet. This wrecked the growth prospects of the United States. And yet it continued to attract immigration. People still thinking the same kind of opportunity was here that was gone. So this is a huge destabilizing event, and it's been going on now for a couple of decades. The other terrible economic effect is the financialization of the economy. What has happened is the financial sector has managed, through its various machinations over time, to essentially absorb all of the discretionary spending power of people. So after you pay your mortgage, your car payment, your student loan, your credit card debt, you don't have any income left to buy anything else. And this is what they mean by the financialization of the economy. The debt burden is so high on people that they have no discretionary income with which to drive economic growth. So these are far more important than the lockdown, and they appear to be permanent. They're now institutionalized, and it's not clear what can be done about them. You have to remember now, Trump was going to bring the jobs back. And the trouble with being president is you find out just what Cynthia found out. There are people there more powerful than you are.
That's right.
And to bring the jobs back, this doesn't please the global corporations. They have a lot of power. And Trump's other big program was to ease the tensions with Russia, to normalize relations. Well, this, of course, doesn't suit the military security complex, because it has a massive budget in excess of $1 trillion a year, and it needs an enemy. It doesn't want, and you can trace all of Trump's troubles to his campaign position that he was going to he was going to normalize relations with Russia. Out of that, we got Russiagate, we got Peachgate, we've got everything else they're trying to do to damn this man and prevent him from doing anything, and they've succeeded. And so what this tells you is they don't permit change. I experienced this in the Treasury, in the Reagan administration. Reagan wanted to stop the stagflation of the time. We were simultaneously experiencing a rise in unemployment and a rise in inflation. And of course, this wrecks a society. And Reagan adopted the supply side approach to this, and we got in and we cured it, stopped it. But there was a huge opposition to making this change. I just wouldn't even attempt to tell you how awful it was. Everyone was working to block what the president wanted to do. Reagan's other achievement was to end the Cold War. And again, we were up against the CIA, military security complex. They did not want the Cold War ended. It's not in their interest. You know, if you don't have a big major enemy, what do you need all their power of the CIA, the military security complex? Why do they need all this budget? And so this was another huge ordeal just to try to. Now, Reagan managed to do both things, but only because he was able to get into office enough people who would fight for him, who would go to the last minute to fight this. Well, Trump hasn't got anybody like that.
Much to Trump's own fault.
Wow.
Because as the president, on day one, this minority president who gained fewer votes than his Democratic Party nominee opponent should have assembled around him the kind of staff that understood that one, the first imperative is to grow your base. And with the immense powers of the US presidency, that is possible. For example, under Bill Clinton, when I came in with Bill Clinton, and he had in his office of protocol a woman whose responsibility was one thing, and that was to reach the presidency itself down into the nooks and crannies and the neighborhoods of the United States. Trump hasn't done that. And I don't know, and he doesn't even have a staff that's thinking about that. Of course, the news is that he has fired Brad Parscale, who was his campaign manager, served as his campaign manager. Campaigning is not only about social media. You can have a jam up, fabulous, fantastic social media campaign and lose. I mean, all we need to do is look at Hillary Clinton, after all, because she had everything and she still lost. What she didn't have was
let me break in. I agree with you. I agree. But there's a huge difference between Trump and Clinton. Clinton was a politician. And Trump was a real estate developer, an entertainer.
Well, you know what?
He had no idea.
But the problem, though, is that as a real estate developer, he's supposed to be smart enough to have some politicians around him. He's supposed to have swamp, and he says, okay, he's going to drain the swamp. Then he's supposed to get swamp, what I call swamp warriors, instead of swamp monsters. Now, what's the difference between a swamp warrior and a swamp monster? The swamp monster is totally familiar with Washington, D.C., is relaxed in that very corrupt environment and becomes as corrupt as the environment. The swamp warrior, on the other hand, is someone who is in Washington, D.C., been there, done that, kind of like you, Dr. Paul.
That's what I wanted to ask you, Cynthia. Where would Trump have got these people other than me and you?
Yeah.
But actually, as it turns out,
where are these people, Cynthia? And more,
they exist.
He could never have gotten them confirmed.
Well, he likes generals. So on the Twitter, and he likes Twitter. So on the Twitter, I made certain recommendations, like, for example, General Taguba. General Taguba is the individual who was charged with investigating Abu Ghraib. One instance in US history that is shameful. It is as shameful as the Tuskegee study, as the Guatemala study, it's totally shameful. And so what General Taguba said publicly was, if I tell the truth, well, of course they wanted him to lie, but he said, if I tell the truth, I'm messed up. Those were not exactly his words. He used expletives that I'm gonna delete.
Right.
But he said, I'm messed up if I tell the truth, and I'm messed up if I lie. So guess what he did? He told the truth. And then, of course, he suffered the consequences. So General Taguba is one such swamp warrior that Trump could have had on his team. I put it on the Twitter as an example of the kind
I remember that
appointment that he could have made.
But Cynthia, do you think the general could have gotten confirmed?
Yes, because at that time, the entire country was talking about, the entire country was about Trump, and there was euphoria. People actually felt that there was going to be the kind of change, the kind of draining of the swamp. And that would have sent a message that, yeah, we can drain the swamp. Another general that Trump should have or could have named to a position within the executive branch. And that was General Honore. General Honore went down to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and basically cleaned it up. And not only did he clean it up, but he also Secretary of Homeland Security at the time was Chertoff. Chertoff had dispatched mercenaries to patrol the streets in New Orleans, and this is like unheard of. So what I'm going to get to is that there's some social engineering that's going on now as a result of coronavirus, COVID-19.
Yeah.
But Trump could have stemmed the tide by selecting knowledgeable people who were also swamp warriors, who had the courage and the fortitude to tell the president what he needed to know and how he needed to go about doing things. This crowd that he has around him, some of them confirmed by the Senate, but not all of them need to be confirmed by the Senate. For example, he's got the chairwoman of the Republican Party. Do you know that approximately 50% of the grassroots positions in the Republican Party remain unfilled? This is something, if you are about your reelection, then you want to shore up your base. And that means the political side as well as the policy side. And the people around him, they're fighting each other, I guess. Yeah. But they're not taking care of the people of the U.S.
I want to ask,
taking care of their boss.
I want to ask something from our perspective here in Trinidad and Tobago. We're a small country on the periphery. There are some benefits of being a small country because people might ignore us. So we can kind of do things that might not attract the attention of the big swamp monsters. But this whole coronavirus change and the depression of the world economy, our parameters seem to be limited. And now here you are talking from the center of American power, saying even when you went into Congress, even if you're part of the cabinet, your powers are limited. For a lot of people, this implies hopelessness. So, well, we can't do anything. What do you have to say about that? I'll start with you, Cynthia, and then you, Paul, after. Mm-hmm.
Well, hopelessness is an appropriate feeling right now. The situation is not good. Mm-hmm. And I conducted a poll on Twitter, and basically the poll was, what kind of leadership do you prefer? And there were three choices. Choice number one, leadership selected for you by the deep state neocons. Choice number two, authentic community leadership tested and proven. Choice number three, I don't know the difference. 46% of the respondents said they didn't know the difference. I think that's our problem.
Yeah. How about you, Paul?
Well, the longer a country exists, the more it builds up bureaucracies who have their own agendas, and the more it builds up a private interest that are powerful lobbyists and essentially can control the political process through the allocation of money and through control of media. The United States has not had an independent media since the Clinton administration, because the Clinton people let 6 mega corporations concentrate the entirety of the media in 6 hands. Mm-hmm. So if you have a democracy that relies on the media to be the watchdog over both the private sector and the public sector, and it can't perform that function, then the people don't have any information. And that's one of the problems in the United States today. The information is uniform. It comes, the same thing comes from CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post,
I want to add here. I mean, you're not just talking theoretically from the outside. You were in the center. So
I'm describing the reality.
Yeah.
And so it is very opposed to change other than changes that enhance its agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since all these agendas, as Cynthia made clear, are not, generally speaking, working for the benefit of the people, of the average citizen, then the process doesn't serve the people. And that's where she's completely correct, and I agree with that. I don't think it's easy to change. I don't really think Trump had a chance. I mean, he's got an establishment administration. His administration's establishment.
Yeah.
I don't think that the two generals Cynthia pointed out could have got confirmed. Reagan had a hell of a time just getting me confirmed, and I was just Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. And the holes that were put on me wasn't coming from the Democrats.
Right.
It was Republicans. It was Robert Dole trying to block my, I think he was one of the Republican leaders in the Senate. So it's very difficult. If you think back to Jimmy Carter,
mm-hmm.
he was an outsider in terms of the Democratic establishment. They didn't really want him. So what did they do? The first thing they did, they framed up his budget director. Then they framed up his chief of staff. And they got their guys in there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they were trying to do the same thing to Ronald Reagan. They didn't want me in there. They tried to keep me out. The first thing they did was kick out his national security advisor on some trumped up fake charge about a Japanese watch. Then the next one he put in there, they got him out. They were trying to get anybody out that was for him. And finally, they got Don Reagan out
mm-hmm.
and put in the establishment guy as chief of staff. And that was the end of the Reagan administration. So they don't quit.
Yeah. Now, you know what? That's an important thing. You said they don't quit. But, you have been experiencing this for decades. And you also haven't quit, right? You're still at it.
Neither is Cynthia.
You're still at it.
Neither
yeah,
is Cynthia. She hasn't quit.
Exactly. She doesn't. So there's obviously something pushing you forward. In spite, it seems the whole world is against you, right? And this is what I mean. I feel animated. Similarly, but you guys have been like right there at the center. What is it that despite all the odds seem totally against you, but
Well, I think that first of all, Cynthia and I both, we have a fighting spirit. It's in our personality. Second, we probably both grew up with the idea that ideas are important and that ideas can prevail. I'm not sure I any longer believe that, but I mean, when I don't say ideas, a truth,
right.
Truth can prevail. And maybe it can over long periods of time after you go through all the turmoil and trouble and disasters that can last for, a century. So I think that that's just, it doesn't have to be as bad as it is. Cynthia can see that. I see that.
Mm-hmm.
We know that it can be better.
Yes.
But I think right now, let me sum this up.
Yeah.
And I think Cynthia will agree. I don't think there will be another president who attempts to represent the people. I think every politician, seeing what has happened to Trump, they will never do anything again except serve the establishment. He's not been able to do, he's been tied up in accusations from day one, and he still is.
Yeah.
COVID's his fault, right? The looting and all that, that's his fault. George Floyd, that's his fault. Everything's his fault. Russiagate, Peachgate, it's endless. The latest thing was Russia paid the Taliban to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan, and Trump didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
How do you do something about something that didn't happen?
Yeah.
So I think what all the politicians have learned is you go against the establishment, they shut you down. And that's just what Senator Schumer warned him. You remember Senator Schumer saying, oh, you shouldn't. The CIA's got 6 ways by Sunday to get back to you. And so I think on the whole, that the minute Trump said he was going to normalize relations with Russia, he signed his doom. He hasn't been able to do anything. They're not going to let him do anything. And I don't think anybody else is going to try. They're going to serve whatever the establishment wants, and they'll present that as good for the people, whatever they come up with. You know, it's like Obamacare. Who does it serve? It served the insurance companies.
That's right.
What they told, and the insurance companies wrote the legislation, but they tell everybody it's for the people. So that's the kind of government we're going to have from now on. There's not going to be any more John Kennedys, no more Reagans, no more Jimmy Carters. And if they can see that a bold, brash billionaire like Trump can be stymied and stopped and put on hold for 4 years, nobody is going to try. And that is my conclusion. That's why I think it's really worse than you could imagine. And so and all this time, what is happening? The United States is collapsing as a society internally. Race relations are being ruined. You can't have a multicultural country based on race hatred of one group for another. Mm-hmm. They teach it in the schools. Yeah. We are collapsing militarily. We're no match for Russia and China. The new world order is going to be Russia and China.
Right.
The West is finished. They're not even nations any longer. They're turned in against themselves. They don't believe in national sovereignty. So how are you going to represent your people if you don't even believe there should be a nation?
Yeah.
So that's in the new world order. There's no nations. Yeah. So where is the leadership? It's in Russia. It's in China. That's the new world order. Right. That's all I got to say.
I can't disagree with Dr. Paul. I mean, because he's been there and he understands what's happening and he understands the trajectory that we are on. And it's a very sad thing. But I wrote a paper called Purple Revolution, where I talked about the weaponization of migration. And what we saw happening in Europe was not an accident. It wasn't spontaneous movement. Yeah. It was all orchestrated and organized. Mm-hmm. And what we saw at the US border was exactly it was the American version of what was happening in Europe. Yeah. So these very purposeful acts, these very purposeful policies, you're lucky that you're in a small country, because Trinidad and Tobago, but how long will Trinidad and Tobago be Trinidad and Tobago? Yeah. And so what we're experiencing is the kind of racial and ethnic strife that you guys were able to get over. It was difficult and your circumstances were imposed upon you, but you were able to get over it, to get through it. And I have to believe, as a child of the South, that in the United States, we too can get through it. But we can't get through it if we don't have a media that is informative, if we don't have an educational system that teaches people to think. And we don't have these things anymore. So we have historical amnesia. We've got people who are willing to tear down every statue, tear down every shrine. And then what they're going to do, though, mark my words, they're going to rewrite the history. And the history will be their history, according to them. Mm-hmm. But it won't be the real history. And we see that happening right now, where the present is being rewritten. What do they call that? When you record something, you don't like it, so then you go back and you re-record.
Right.
That's what's happening. Yes. Please pardon me. I need to have some water next to me and I don't. But that's what's happening. And so those of us who know sort of like the backstory of why certain things happen, we can see that the narrative is being changed literally before our eyes. We can see it happening.
Yeah.
And all they will do by, defacing the statues. Yeah. Bottom line is, whatever Confederate history is my history too. Mm-hmm. So you can't come from someplace else and tell me what my history is. You can't do that. But we've abdicated even our right to our identities over to someone else. And that someone else doesn't care a thing about the United States, doesn't care a thing about the people of the US. And then in the end, all I can say is Trinidadians, beware of the gospel you believe.
Yeah.
Because in the end, it could be turned against you.
Yeah. I know that you have some time limitations, so we'll have to end it here. But it's thanks both of you for making this first show such a success. You guys, both of you, have given us such examples of a lifetime of service, of sacrifice, of the courageous adherence and search for truth. And more than ever, in this time of uncertainty and mass engineered fear, we need this. Despite everything, I still believe the future is not lost. We must not give up, and it's always up to us to make our world better. But I want to thank both of you for being on.
And Dr. Paul, I'll see you very soon when you come head this way.
Are you in Atlanta now?
Yes, I am.
Well, I'm still in Florida, but I'm going to get up there sooner or later.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it too.
You know, you're one of my favorite people.
And you are mine as well.
Okay.
That's great.
Kirk,
so you see, we had a love fest here.
Yes, we did. That's it for Global Politics this week. Thank you, and see you again next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.